Hi guys! First of all, happy Easter, everyone. For this week's video, I've taken on, I guess you could call it a commission. Well, not exactly. Basically, I was contacted a month or so ago by the nice folks at Huzzahcon, which is sort of a wargaming show in Maine. It takes place on the 15th through 17th of May, I guess every year. And anyway, they asked me to paint a sort of a figure for them. As far as I understand it, what they're going to be doing is they're going to have a painting workshop, and they want to just have the same figure kind of painted by a whole bunch of different artists or figure painters, just to show kind of what different techniques and different appearances you can create on the same figure, and just give people some inspiration, I think, for their work, and some ideas and that kind of thing. So this is the figure they provided for me. This is by Old Glory, so it's a manufacturer I haven't done before, but I mean, I suppose fittingly for, being an American convention and everything, they wanted to do some AWI units, and they purposely chose a very sort of generic one, something that you could paint as a loyalist or a American regular or a militiaman. You can go kind of any direction you want with this figure, and that was because they wanted to give kind of the painter sort of the maximum sort of scope when they were doing this. So I received this figure from them a couple days ago. It was all prepped, base coated. It had been based as well, which is all really nice. That's going to save me a lot of time. And you can see I've already painted the skin and hair on him so that we can just get right on into the uniform. Now, if you have watched any of my earlier videos, you know that I have done a couple AWI figures before. I've done it as sort of an American regular unit insofar as they were regular, and I've done a British redcoat. So for this video, I thought I would definitely go for the more sort of irregular angle indeed, and I'm going to be painting this guy up as sort of a militiaman or a loyalist, so he's going to be wearing more civilian clothes. He's not going to be a uniform. He's not going to be wearing, sort of bright uniform colors. I wanted to show you, if you want to do kind of a more generic 18th century type fighter, then, this video is basically going to cover how you can go about doing this. And let's see, that's pretty much it, I think. Again, a big thanks to the folks at Huzzahcon for giving me a chance to participate in this project. I will put a link to more information on the con below in the description box, so you can check that out, also with tutorials for the other AWI figures I have done in the past. And I don't know yet exactly what colors I'm going to be using on this guy. I'm going to be kind of making it up as I go along, because it's, as I said, he's not going to be wearing a standard uniform. So I'm just gonna kind of play it best by ear, see what looks nice, and we're going to, you can kind of follow along with me and see what I come up with.
Okay, so now I'm going to start painting the pants, and I kind of arbitrarily decided that I would go with a light gray for these. Light gray is a little easier to deal with than white. It's very similar in many respects, but I don't feel like I have to keep highlighting and highlighting until it's super bright. I can just stop where I want, and it's not so demanding, I guess. You don't have to go so far with it. Just, stop when you feel like it. It's just a little bit more of a relaxed color to paint, I guess. So the base I'm using here is a mixture of neutral gray and sky gray. Obviously, there's a lot more sky gray in here because it's quite a light color. At the same time, I'm also going to be working on his spats. You can't really see them too well, but they kind of cover the top part of his boots. These were often kind of a medium, darker gray color, and that's what I'm going to be doing here. So I'm going to be base coating those just with pure neutral gray, with just, maybe a hint of sky gray to lighten it, but they should definitely be noticeably darker than the pants. Now I'm going to be applying a wash. Now, I mixed Nuln Oil and Agri's Earthshade from Citadel here, and I'm going to be applying it just its full strength to the spats because they're darker, and I want them to be higher contrast. Anyway, I'm going to use the same color on the pants, but I'm going to thin it down a lot with water. So you can see it's not, very concentrated going on here. You should thin it down at least 3 or 4 times with water, so you've got a real thin effect, because when you're, if you use washes on really light colors like this, you want them to be super duper subtle so that they don't ruin sort of the light effect that you're going for. Start highlighting the pants, and highlights for this are pretty straightforward. I'm just taking that color I used for the base and just kind of adding in more sky gray to lighten it. Now this first highlight, as you can see, It's subtle. It's not too, you know, it's not really too different over the base, and especially you'll notice when it dries that it will be even more subtle. That's generally something you need to pay attention to, especially with lighter transparent colors. They may go on reasonably strong, and then when they're dry, they're actually quite a lot less noticeable than you think. So, you know, if you're not sure, you may want to do some tests with your paint colors just to see like what you get when they're dry, so you know kind of what to expect. But anyway, I'm layering this color on pretty much all the areas of the pants except any sort of real deep creases and folds. And obviously between his legs and sort of where there's shadows on sort of the front of his shins and stuff, I'm going to be applying this paint very thinly and blending it out already at this point because, you know, I don't want those areas to get much lighter. Kind of at the same time, I'm going to be working on the spats along with this, and I'm going to be doing a similar thing. I'm just, again, starting from my base color and lightening it up. So while I started from a neutral gray on those spats, my my first highlight on those will take neutral gray and just lighten it slightly with a little bit of sky gray. But again, you don't want to use the same colors on the pants and the spats. You want the spats a lot darker, so make sure that you're working with a whole sort of, I don't know, octave lower, I guess you could say, of colors when you're painting on the spat area. And here I'm just continuing the same way. There's more sky gray in my mix again, and I'm starting to pick out highlight areas now with my color. So you can see I'm emphasizing the knees and the tops of folds and creases and anywhere where light is hitting. And because, again, this is a thin, pretty transparent color we're dealing with, even if it's not white, you will probably find that you need to apply at least several layers, or you may, you know, to get sort of the maximum sort of concentration and pigmentation. So, you know, you can go back over the same areas with the same color multiple times before you really kind of wear that color out and you need to move on. I'm continuing in the same way too with the spats, just lightening it a little bit more and starting to try to, you know, emphasize sort of areas where I think light is going to be hitting or where there's any sort of small folds or creases. But again, make sure those colors that you're using on the spats are sort of darker grays than the ones that you're working with on the pants. Now I'm kind of finishing up the pants here. I've got a layer I'm applying here of just pure sky gray. It's thinned a fair amount, so it's rather transparent like white, so it needs to be built up several times to kind of achieve maximum sort of, you know, effect. And I'm really, you know, focusing it really sort of on high areas where there's light hitting, tops of creases, knees, all those areas, cuffs, and every time I go around and apply a new opaque, I put it on progressively smaller and smaller layers. But again, since we're not painting white, you don't have to stress as much about going over it as many times until it looks really white. You know, you can just do it until you get a pleasing light gray color that sort of suits you, and then you can stop. When it comes to the spats, I'm still doing the same thing, just working with darker colors. I'm going to make sure sort of the highest highlight on my spats is kind of like the base color that I put on the pants to begin with, if that makes sense. And that sounds maybe pretty light for those dark gray spats, but remember the color's pretty thinned down and it's got kind of really dark grays underneath. So especially if you apply it lightly, it's not going to get as light as the pans right away. There's going to be a lot of transparency and it's going to dry quite a bit darker, so you'll still get a nice effect. If you feel like you really need to emphasize things a little bit further, and I did at some point, I said I really wanted to add some really strong highlights to like the knees and creases. I took some off-white here, so not quite pure white, and I'm layering it onto the sort of the brightest areas of the figure. And again, it is, again, a very transparent color, so we're not going to end up instantly with off-white. It's still going to be more of a gray color, and I'm not going to be applying too many layers of this or building it up too far, so that I can still kind of preserve the sort of light gray look that I'm going for on this particular unit. Now I've seen a lot of pictures of really attractive 18th century, well, not uniforms, but outfits that involve some sort of gray blue. I really like those, but I didn't want to do that as the dominant color in this figure because I've been doing so many models recently that are wearing gray blue, but I wanted to just have sort of an accent of it. So I decided that I would paint his sort of vest in gray blue. So I'm base coating that area using a mixture of Oxford blue and just black to create sort of a really dark blue-gray color as my base. I'm also going to give him a patch on his knee, just to make the figure a little bit more interesting because he's kind of a ragtag militiaman. I'm base coating that and using the same colors on that. And so then once I put the base down, I'm going to highlight first with just some pure Oxford blue, and then once that's done, I'm going to lighten it up to get a higher highlight, and that's just achieved by mixing either off-white or the sky gray in there. You can do 1 or 2 layers. It doesn't really matter. This is quite a small area of the uniform that doesn't show very much, so you don't have to spend a lot of time or effort into it. You can just kind of do this really quick, but you're seeing I'm going to sort of highlight it, especially on the knee, because there's going to be a lot of light hitting, and I want to get it to be a little bit of a lighter blue shade in that location. Now, besides seeing a lot of people wearing sort of blue-gray outfits, I saw a lot of really attractive sort of combinations that involve sort of a reddish-brown. So I thought, yeah, that would be a nice color for my coat. So that's what I decided to use here. So I'm going to be base coating the whole jacket here using Vallejo chocolate brown, just kind of to start out with. Now, the way this figure is sculpted, he could be just as easily a more regular army unit. You can see he's got turnbacks on his coat, which is something that was not so common with civilian jackets, but we can kind of fake it a little bit, and that's what I'm going to do here. So if it was, a military coat, those turnbacks would almost certainly be white. But kind of to, make this more civilian, I'm just going to paint the turnbacks in the exact same color as the rest of the jacket, So that's the nice thing about figures from this period, this area, you can flub them an awful lot and sort of just kind of adapt them a little bit to your purposes, and it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. For my first highlight on the jacket, I'm going to be using saddle brown here, which is a beautiful, rich, warm red-brown color, kind of terracotta or earth. It's also a pretty strong, potent color, so you probably want to thin it a little bit when you work on it. You can see it really has an immediate effect, right away. So I'm going to be applying it pretty carefully, but in pretty much all areas of the jacket, except all the sort of folds and creases, which I want to remain dark, and all the sort of dividing areas between the different parts of the jacket. And I'm going to also blend it out so that it stays dark or sort of under his arms and areas where there would be shadows. So the first layer I'm going to try to apply transparently and kind of smooth it out. And I'm going to then go back in and build it up a little bit more strongly on areas that I know that I'm going to be highlighting more heavily in the future. I'm now going to start lightening the saddle brown using cork brown, which, if you pay attention, is the base coat that I use often when I'm painting skin. This first pass or go around, I haven't mixed very much cork brown into the saddle brown. It's still pretty subtle. So I'm just going to start, sort of working that over all of my highlight areas on the jacket, kind of thinly. There's still so much of the saddle brown in there. It's still a pretty strong color, so you're going to want to be a little bit careful. But, just go back over all the areas and highlight where there should obviously be highlights. This jacket, a lot of pieces of equipment are obscuring it, so it shouldn't be, too difficult. You shouldn't have to do a lot of blending, except maybe on the arms. It's just really a question of, picking out the lighter areas here. At this point, I'm doing it again. This time you can see I've really added significantly more of the cork brown into my mixture. It's gotten quite a bit lighter here what I'm doing, and you can really see that it's making kind of a big difference to the tone. So I'm applying this now very carefully to the tops of creases and folds, along the tops of his arms and shoulders where light is hitting, along the edges of fabric, seams, things like that, and blending it out carefully. So now the jacket is still going to keep that red color, but it's going to get a little bit of more of a sort of a, fleshy color to it, a little bit of a lighter, paler shade. It's not going to be quite so much of a deep red effect. And you can layer this a couple of times if you want to build it up more in a few places. It's really up to you how you do with this, or you can go with a couple layers and maybe add some more of the cork brown into the second layer to get an even lighter, brighter effect. You can, this is really kind of how nice, how subtle you want it to be. I'm probably spending a little bit of extra time on this just because this is for Huzzahcon, and I want to do a little nicer job, or spend just a little bit more time on the figure than I might otherwise. I'm also using the browns to make sort of a simple checked pattern on his knee patch. I didn't show it before, but I just first roughed the pattern out in the sort of the base color, that chocolate brown, and now that I'm up to sort of the highest highlight, I'm going back over it to sort of just put the highlight pattern on. But you don't need to really apply all the same layers of brown to that you would to the whole jacket, because it's just too small an area. It won't show. You should just kind of go with the darkest color and the lightest color and leave it at that. And this high highlight color has now had some Iraqi sand mixed into it now to make it really, really light. And I'm going to be putting this really only on edges, sharp creases and folds, and anywhere else I'm going to blend it out a lot. But you can get kind of an interesting effect here on clothing. If you have a reasonably dark color like this red-brown, and then you apply an edge highlight like this one, that's substantially lighter and sort of a more faded tone, you can give the impression of the fabric either being shiny or, in this case, velvety. So, and that's a kind of fabric effect that you're going to see a fair amount on sort of 18th century clothing from this period. So it works really well. So by highlighting this with this kind of very light, kind of faded color on this otherwise darker, redder color, and then only focusing on sharp folds and creases and edges and stuff like that, it will look a little bit like velvet, because you'll notice velvet, the way light hits velvet, it tends to be dark all over except where there's like sharp edges and creases, and there you get like a really sort of strong highlight and the fabric looks a whole bunch more light. So this is kind of one way that you can sort of mimic that effect on these scale figures. Now I'm going to start working on a bit of his equipment. I'm going to do his water bottle first. It's made out of wood. It's kind of a staved construction. These were often left natural wood, but sometimes they were painted. And I'm going to do that here just for a little extra interest, and also as a way of kind of unifying the colors here, sort of repeating some of the colors that we had. So I'm going to be painting it in a sort of a dark gray blue, similar to the jacket, just not quite so light. So I coated it with a mix of black and the Oxford blue again, though a much darker shade than I used on the vest. I'm also going to be base coating his straps and his bayonet holder here using German camouflage black brown. So basically areas that I'm planning to paint in a really dark brown leather color. I'm just going to, take care of that base coat right now. As for highlighting the water canteen, it's going to go in the same way to the vest, really. I'm just not going to do it as high. So the first highlight will be just with slightly more blue mixed in, so still a dark gray, but just more blue. And then I will highlight it with pure Oxford blue, and then finally finish off by adding maybe just a touch of sky gray to lighten it. But I want it to be that sort of blue-gray color, but I'm not going to go as far and make it as light as I did on the jacket, basically. I'm going to be doing the strap on his cartridge bag. This could be a lot of colors. It could be leather, especially if you're painting an American militia type guy. There's going to be a huge variation, but I seem to have this feeling, and from looking at a lot of pictures, that very often these were light colored or white, even on irregular units. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. I'm base coating this here using some sky gray that's been darkened very slightly with neutral gray. I don't want it too dark. And then I'm going to kind of highlight it like I did the pants, but not to the same extent because it's a smaller area. So I'll go over it with some sky gray and then finish off on the sort of the brightest hires, like on top of his shoulder, with some off-white. And I'll just layer those colors on a couple times. I don't need to add very much, and just do that a couple times using the same colors until I feel like I've got sort of the effect that I want, and it's just light enough. Now I'm going to move on to sort of the dark gray black areas on the figure, which include his boots, his cartridge case, his hat, and he's also got a little ribbon for his ponytail, and I often like to do those in sort of a silky black because that's pretty common. So obviously I've just base coated these areas with black, as you might expect, and I'm going to apply a general highlight here of German gray, and that's going to go pretty much everywhere except really down in deep sort of creases or any sort of seams or things like that, but you can be pretty generous with that. And then after that, highlighting is just a question of lightening it with something. I often use neutral gray, but In this case, I'm using sky gray, and it's a lot lighter gray, of course, but you can do the same thing. You just need to add a whole bunch less of it in, obviously, but it works in the same fashion. And your first highlight should be pretty subtle. You don't want to overdo it, especially with something like the hat. The hat, you don't want it to get shiny. Like with the leather shoes and the cartridge case and even the bow, you want a sort of a shiny effect in those. And so if you go up to a fairly high gray at some point, that's not such a bad thing, but on the hat, it needs to feel smooth and subtle, and any sort of gradation in color needs to be very gradual. So that's why it's important you work with kind of subtle shades. But with the hat, you can see the back, for example, gets highlighted a bit, and then on the front, where there's sort of some bends in it, you're going to want to highlight sort of the areas that bulge out and kind of make sure there's darker areas down in between. And on the top, you want to highlight just the part that's over his head, and in the other areas you can leave quite dark and shadowed. And you can see I'm just continually adding in more and more gray and lightening the color further and further. At some point I'm going to just stop applying it to the hat because, as I said, I don't want it to get too shiny looking or too high highlighted, but I'm going to continue using those high shades. As you can see, it's a sort of edge around the cartridge case and on sort of the toes and heels of his shoes to make it look like there's some sort of shininess, some reflection going on in the leather. I found a neat technique with the cartridge bag there. If you want to apply the light gray and sort of horizontal thin lines, that kind of is neat. It gives a little bit of texture, and if you kind of look at those cartridge bags, you see that the leather is a little textured, sort of. So adding those kind of stripes when you're applying the high highlight color works really well. If you do add any of this higher gray on his hat, I suggest you keep it really thin, you blend it out a lot. You only put it very sparing, and you can run it along just the top edge of his hat if you want to, because that area is, of course, an area where you expect a lot of light to hit, and you want it to be a little bit more extreme there. If you end up getting the hat too light, you can also just kind of take it back down, unify it a little bit with with a wash of Nuln oil, for example, but that's really up to you. I didn't do it here, but you might find that you need to if it got a little bit out of control. I'm also going to be painting the cockade here on his hat, and these seem to have been colored sort of as an indicator sometimes of unit or allegiance. I'm going to make his white. So I just base coated it here really quick using sky gray, and now I'm going to take the off-white color and sort of very quickly just highlight the higher areas of it, but small things so you don't have to spend too much time on it. I'm going to return to the leather and sort of wood areas on this figure. I'm going to start by highlighting further the brown leather that I started earlier. So that includes the strap on his water bottle, his bayonet holder, and of course there's a strap on his gun. I'm going to apply a first highlight here of a Foundry Bay Brown medium, and I'm going to do that pretty generously. I'm also going to start out by base coating his rifle or his musket here, and the stock color that I'm using here is going to be a bay brown shade. I'm just going to apply that pretty generously everywhere. Next, I'm going to get out some Foundry Chestnut Brown medium, as I often do. I'm going to use that to highlight everything. In the case of the leather straps, I'm going to apply it very thinly and just a really small, subtle edge highlight because I want those areas to stay pretty dark. I don't want, this color should just be sort of the slight accent here and there, just kind of, touched really along the edges and definitely faded in, so it gets darker in the middle. You can see on the rifle stock, I'm going to be a lot more generous with it. I'm going to build it up and make sure it's pretty thick at the edges. And again, it's going to get sort of fade out a little bit, but it's going to be a much stronger, much heavier application on the wooden areas. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and grab some chestnut medium, also from Foundry, and I'm going to repeat the process. On the leather, same as before, I'm going to make it real subtle, even more so than with the chestnut shade. So just the slightest hint, really subtle. You can see just along the edges of the straps, just to give a little wear, but really just touch it, especially since these straps are so thin. And we don't want them to look too much like the wooden areas. We want there to be some distinction there, so you have to be careful. And then when it comes to the wood on the gun, you can be a lot more generous in how much you put on. I'm applying it the same way, starting at the edges and sort of blending it inwards, but you can layer it on and build it up, and you can really make that gun a kind of a more yellowy color, as you can see, and just kind of smooth. And you can apply some lines or do it in a little bit of a textured way if you want to give the idea that there's some grain going on, but that's really up to you. You just want to make sure your final layer is really smooth and crisp, and just use it as a sort of a fine lining color along the edges of the different pieces of wood, you know, where they join with each other or where they join with the metal barrel. Now I'm going to focus on the steel kind of metal areas on this figure. As usual, I'm using a base coat that's a mixture of German gray with a little bit of Vallejo air gunmetal in it, so it should be a pretty dark metallic gray. And now the main areas that are getting this treatment are going to be the gun hardware, the barrel, the bayonet, sort of the things you'd expect. But I'm also going to be doing the buttons on his jacket in this color. Now you could, of course, use a gold bronze color for those, but because the jacket is sort of this lighter brown color, a warm shade basically, I feel like they're not going to, a bronze button would not stand out as much as a steel button. So that's why I'm going to be doing that here. So once I've got the base coat on, I'm going to make a sort of an intermediate tone by mixing more of the gunmetal in to lighten it up slightly. And you don't really need to apply this color to the buttons because they're so small, but I'm going to use it to get a more sort of subtle highlight on, particularly on the bayonet and the barrel of the gun, those kinds of areas. Once that's done, then you can just go ahead and take some pure gunmetal and use that very lightly, particularly on the gun, to get sort of a shine on the barrel and the bayonet and all those sort of separate pieces. Really pick them out and define them with this bright color. And the bayonet, you really want those shiny colors, particularly focused on sort of the edges. You want to appear sharp. And you're also going to want to put that pure gunmetal onto all of your buttons to give them some extra shine and brightness, and really focus on that. If you feel like you know, in the process of applying this highlight color, you kind of muddy up your metal areas a little bit and it loses some definition, you can easily go back in with just some pure German gray and use that to pick out some dividing lines or define areas that you missed a little bit better. There is a little bit of gold bronze to do on this figure, not very much. There's some sort of hardware on his water bottle, sort of on the straps. There is a little bit on the end of the bayonet case, and then there's just some sort of fittings on his gun, like on the butt, and some, you know, some trim pieces that all should be kind of gold or bronze. And I'm just base coating those here with a mixture of German camouflage black, brown, and a bit of Vallejo air gold in there, just to start out with. And then I'm just going to go back over it real quickly with just pure Vallejo air gold. You don't need to do much more than that because these are real small areas, and none of these are places that we want to have a really shiny, really blingy gold. It's more of sort of a warm bronze color. Okay, and here is our finished sort of American irregular militia type unit that I have prepared for Huzzahcon. I like how he came out. I haven't done this type of militia figure for a while. I have painted some for our black powder armies, but it's been a while, and it's kind of nice to get back into it. I guess I enjoy them a little bit more in some ways than doing sort of the more regular units, just because you can be more creative. You can mix colors up. You don't have to have precise things happening in precise areas, and you don't have all the sort of piping and trim and crap that can be really frustrating to deal with on 18th century uniforms. I know some people actually like that less. They like when things are prescribed and they know what they have to paint and they don't have to work it out themselves. But, you know, that's kind of a matter of preference. For me, this is a little bit more fun because I can use more imagination. I can add more personality to the figures too, like you see that patch. You could try, for example, adding numbering or writing for the unit on either the water bottle or the cartridge case too. That was really common that they decorated those or added, you know, sort of markings to them. So that's another way you could add sort of extra personality and detail to your unit here. He's not quite done. I'm now going to finish him up and get him ready for sending into the folks at Huzzah. So I'll go ahead and paint the groundwork, add some static grass, that kind of thing, glue him to a nicer base. I'm not going to cover that here, but, I've done videos on basing and groundwork before, so, you probably get the ideas. Anyway, I had a lot of fun with this figure. A huge thanks to the folks at Huzzahcon for letting me participate and do this. I hope you guys like the figure and you find it useful, that it helps with your painting classes. Once again, if you have any questions for me, you can leave them in the comments down below. Please be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe if you have not done so already to my channel, of course, so that you can keep up with the latest developments. And that is all for now, and I will be seeing you next time.